Day 21. Welcome back. I'm Dr. Rivka, Edery, author of Spatial, Psy.D. And in day 21, here is what has been withheld from you for the past 20 days. Beginning tonight, you may bring a genuine question to the table. That is the permission. That is what phase 3 unlocks, and it is why the first 2/3 of this course were run the way they were run. Open your workbook to day 21 and look at the page. There is something on it that has never been there before, and it sits above everything else. Step 0, your question. Not step 6, not an addendum at the end. Step 0, before the somatic baseline, before the touch log, before you have picked up the deck. The first thing you do tonight is write down what you want to know. Now, I want you to feel the weight of what has just changed, because it is not a small addition, and I'm not going to present it as a treat you have earned. For 20 days, you sat down at that table wanting nothing. No stake, no outcome. You recorded what arrived and you closed the field. Tonight, you sit down wanting an answer. And wanting is the most corrosive force in this entire method. Every failure mode I have taught you, the reach, the hedge, the improved map, the wallpaper face, every single one of them is powered by wanting a particular outcome. So the permission does not arrive alone. It arrives with a discipline attached. And if you take the permission without the discipline, you will undo 20 days of work in a single evening. Why was this withheld? The book gives the reason in one clause, and every word of it matters. The first 20 days were deliberately question-free, so you could learn to trust the geometry on its own terms. Now you are ready to point it somewhere. On its own terms, not on yours. The geometry had to be allowed to say whatever it says without you standing over it wanting something. Because a person who wants something from a layout will get it. You know this. You have known it since day 8. The mind supplies meaning to noise effortlessly, and it does not tell you when it is doing so. If I had let you ask a question on day 3, here is exactly what would have happened. You would have laid out cards with a situation in your mind, a person, a decision, a fear, and the geometry would have arranged itself in your perception around that situation. The cluster would have been about him. The void would have been about the thing you're avoiding. And you would never in 30 days or 30 years have learned what a cluster looks like when it is not about anything. You would have had no baseline. You would have had no way to distinguish the field from your own perception, because you would have never seen the field without one. And now you're ready. Not because you've earned a reward, but because you can now do a specific thing you could not do 3 weeks ago. You can tell the difference between what arrives and what you supplied. That is the capacity. That is what 20 days of not asking bought you. And tonight, you're going to need every bit of it. Step 0. And I want you to notice that it is numbered 0 rather than 1, because that number is doing real work. The instruction. Write it below in plain language before you shuffle, before the filter, before the somatic baseline, before your hands touch the deck at all. Why does the ordering matter so much? Because it is the same architecture as everything else in this method, and by now you should be able to see it coming. The question goes on the page while you still do not know what the field will do with it, which means it cannot be adjusted afterward to fit what arrived. Think about what would happen otherwise. You lay out the cards, you read the geometry, a tight cluster near your body, a void where the future should be, and then you decide what your question was. I was asking about whether to leave the job. And look, the geometry says the situation is close in and already known, and there is nothing ahead. How precise, how apt. You would have written the question to fit the answer, and it would have felt like clarity. It would have felt like the reading revealing to you what you had really been asking all along, which is one of the most seductive sensations available in this entire field, and it is worth nothing. That is meaning migration. Day 12, arriving in a new and much more dangerous location, because now it can migrate into the question itself. So the question is frozen before the shuffle, exactly as the map is frozen before the flip. Same rule, same reason, one step earlier in the process. You have been practicing this for 20 days without knowing it. The book Spatial says a genuine question. That word is in the instruction, and it is not decoration. So let me define it operationally, because genuine is exactly the sort of word people nod along to and then ignore. A genuine question has 3 properties. 1, you do not know the answer. 2, you're not hoping for one. There is no outcome you would prefer. 3, you would accept either result and adjust accordingly. If any of those 3 is false, it is not a genuine question. It is something wearing a question's clothes. Look at the contrast. Will it work out with X? That is not a question. That is a hope with a question mark stapled to it. You know what you want to hear, and the field will oblige you, not because the field is malicious, but because you will oblige you. Every ambiguity in that layout will resolve toward the answer you want, and you will not experience yourself deciding anything. Now, what is the shape of my situation with X? That is genuine. You do not know the shape. There is no shape you're hoping for. Whatever the geometry says, tight, split, void where you expected density, you would accept it and think about it. And notice what the second question does that the first cannot. It asks for structure, which is the only thing this method has ever claimed to read. The first question asks for a verdict about the future. That is not what you have spent 20 days training to see, and it is not what the geometry is capable of telling you. Ask what you've been trained to hear. Structure, not outcome. Here is the test. Before you write your question in step 0, ask one question of the question. If the geometry says the opposite of what I want, will I write that down? Sit with it. Do not answer quickly. If you hesitate, even slightly, even for a moment, then the question is not genuine, and you should put it away and ask a different one tonight. I want to be very clear that this is not a test of your virtue. It is a test of your readiness, and readiness is situational. There is no shame in discovering that you are not, tonight, able to be neutral about a particular subject. That is a piece of self-knowledge, and it is worth having. But if you ask it anyway, if you bring to the table a question whose answer you're not prepared to accept, then you will not get a reading. You will get a mirror, and you will not know it because a mirror is very good at looking like a window. You're not ready to ask something you are not ready to be wrong about. And here's a practical suggestion for tonight on your first question, which I would ask you to take seriously. Don't start with the big one. You have something you desperately want to know. Everyone does. That is not the question for tonight. Tonight is the first time you have ever pointed this instrument at anything, and you do not test a new instrument on the measurement that matters most. Ask something you're genuinely curious about and only mildly invested in, something where you would shrug at either answer. Use tonight to learn what asking does to you, because that is the thing you actually need to find out, and you cannot find it out while your heart is pounding. Now, the thing that almost nobody teaching this kind of work would tell you, and the reason I trust this book, Spatial Psy, the question changes the instrument. Days 1 through 20 ran under neutral, question-free conditions. Days 21 through 30 now each carry a question for you to ask. Those are two different registers. And a reading taken in one is not directly comparable to a reading taken in the other. Read that again because it has real consequences. There are two different registers, and I'll repeat this. A reading taken in one is not directly comparable to a reading taken in the other. You're not continuing the experiment. You're running a second one. Your 20 neutral sessions are a completed body of work. They describe what your field does when nothing is being asked of it. That is finished and it is preserved. And you must not go back and reinterpret it in light of what happens over the next 10 days. The 10 sessions ahead are a new database gathered under a new condition. They will need to be compared to each other and carefully against the baseline, but only with the difference in conditions held firmly in mind. Now, I want you to notice something about the fact that I'm telling you this at all. A lesser method would simply have said, now you may ask questions and the readings will be even better because now they are focused. This one says, now you may ask questions and this contaminates the comparison you have spent 20 days building, and here is how to handle that honestly. That is what it looks like when a method is more interested in being true than in being impressive. Track your two registers separately. Label them. Days 1 through 20, neutral. Days 21 through 30, questioned. Never merge them without noting which is which.